Ash, it's so great to see you again, and it's lovely to have you here. We met at the Women of the Future event, and you spoke that day, and it was really impressive, and I really enjoyed it. So, but it's been a while. How you been?
Yeah, good, thank you. Busy, busy. That seems like a very long time ago, but I'm glad you remembered the session we did. I mean, Shabnam, my Afghan friend, was pretty inspiring. I think it was quite overwhelming for her to see the support, but it's such a great community that Jules and Pinky have set up with the Women of the Future. It was lovely to be part of it,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the only time I've ever seen an entire conference hall in tears, actually listening to that
including me.
story. Yeah,
I
yeah,
knew, I
we're all
knew that
crying.
it. I knew that when it got to the emotional, the emotional stuff, if she went, then it was going to be hard for anybody, including me, to keep a dry eye. So
Yeah.
it was anticipated, but it didn't help.
No, she's an incredibly brave person, unbelievable. But from the point of view of your book, because you've published this book which is called Mindful Soldier, and I'll wave it at the end so everybody knows what the cover looks like. But when did you decide that you wanted to write this down, all your experiences, and sort of what it had taught you? What made you write it as a book?
It's a good question. It's probably not the answer that you or your listeners would expect or want to hear necessarily. I didn't really mean to write a book. I'd never planned on writing a book. It just wasn't really how I was thinking. I've gone through many things in my life, both personal and professional, that people over time were saying you've got to write some of this stuff down. And because of the leadership development work I do with businesses around the world and different organizations, again, I sort of dipped into some of the stories that I tell in the book if I'm talking about different themes that I think would be relevant for them as a leadership team, trying to think about strategy or complexity or resilience, both personal or organizational. And the sort of the tidbits that I gave them, they said, we'd love to know more about this. Have you got a book? And I would always promote other people's books because I didn't have one. And so it sort of came to a point I thought maybe there is something in it. And I was ground down by customers, clients, friends, and family, and had a kind of a confluence of things where I was in between jobs. And I had a period where I was being paid while I couldn't work for the next company yet. So I thought if I'm going to do it, now is the time. And I had about 4 months to sit down and write. So I sort of decided to commit just a bit of a brain dump to paper. I know that's not how you're supposed to do a book, but I thought
No,
if at
I think
least I
that's as
get,
good a way as any.
well, I thought if I get it on paper, then hopefully we can work out whether there is enough in here to make something coherent that would be useful. And that was really the genesis of all of it. I wasn't willing to even start the process unless I could find a way to make the book interesting, entertaining, but above all else, useful and support people in some way. So it was kind of, yeah, I didn't want to do a memoir or anything that's been done to death. I didn't feel like I, really justified a memoir per se. So while they are my stories, it was really to try and think about how it might help other people.
No, that's great. So, I mean, we're really looking at this from a business point of view, and I'm really interested in how your learning as a soldier translates into the business context. Because on the very face of things, you'd think they were quite different. And your experience is quite extreme compared to what most of us face, which is the day-to-day battle with the computer screen. Um,
Mm.
so when you look at resilience in business and for experience with the businesses that you work with, where do you think businesses get resilience wrong when they, because there's so much training in resilience these days for business
Yeah.
people, where are they going wrong, do you think, and what are they
Well, I think
getting
you hit
right?
yeah, yeah. I think you're hitting the nail on the head there that training is key. And I think a lot of businesses are so busy trying to do their business stuff day to day that they often deprioritize the training aspect, whether it's personal development for individuals or for teams, and putting them through the paces when things go wrong in scenarios where you could anticipate that at some point there is a risk to your business of something happening over which you have no control. And this is kind of the genesis of how the military works, is that you spend most of your time training, not kind of hoping that you'll never go to war, but knowing that you've trained for many different types of scenarios that in the at the point where something like something sort of bad does happen, that you have some muscle memory that you can go back to and at least have a foundation on which you can rely. It may be a very different outcome that you're seeking, but you know that you've been tested and put under pressure to make decisions or work together as a team, cross-functionally, and that sort of stuff. And one thing I wish businesses would spend more time doing is not just expecting people to suddenly all perform brilliantly when there is an issue that requires a resilient team or individuals within that team to perform, and then be surprised when it doesn't work that way. So I think that's probably my biggest worry, is that many businesses are sort of proceeding on a strategy of hope, hoping that it doesn't happen to them. And then when it does, being
Yeah.
suddenly very surprised that it's happened and then not quite knowing what to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have made global that way, actually, just the hope and hoping
Well,
for the best.
yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's a really good point. And I think people quite often go into sort of panic or shock really when they're faced with something at work that's really hard. And I think as you get older, I mean, when you get to my age, it's a lot easier because you've seen a lot of things. But I mean, how do you suggest people keep functioning? I mean, you went through situations where you were actually shot. I mean, that's a little more than most of us
Yeah,
get on the
yeah,
high
hopefully.
street in Northampton or wherever you happen to be. So,
Yeah.
what actually happens in your head at that moment? I mean, the physical pain itself must be demanding, but how did you keep functioning and how do you translate that into a business context?
Well, to my previous answer, we trained for many scenarios, but
Mm.
nobody had actually shot me before I was actually shot. So I knew the principle of what would happen and trying to make sure that you got all your team out of the
Yeah.
killing zone, or, safely, etc., so that you wouldn't be taking further casualties, etc. But for me, my brain didn't really keep up when it actually happened the first time, when I was in a proper contact battle with an enemy force intent on killing us, and they chose to ambush us when we were in the place that they felt was the best sort of real estate to kill or hurt us. My brain didn't keep up, and that was shocking, not unexpected, but it was shocking to me and frustrating in the moment that it all just happened so fast. Now, it wasn't too many years and too many kind of gun battles later where I felt, rather than everything being spinning absolutely out of control, and my inability in the moment to really understand what was happening at a tactical or higher level, those few years later, everything felt like time slowed down, and I felt like I had almost all the time in the world to make decisions when other people on my team, for whom it might be their first contact, were looking to me for those answers. So as a leader, I felt that I'd failed in that first sort of battle, as it were. But I had been shot in both legs and hit with a couple of grenades, and all my team took casualties. There was a lot going on. But to your point about the pain, it's weird. That wasn't the primary thing that was going on at all. You almost don't feel the pain in the moment. I mean, I got felt like I'd been winded with the sort of blunt trauma and the kind of nauseating feeling. There's a more of an ache than a sort of a chronic sting, if that makes sense. Although I do liken it to a
Mm.
swarm of stinging bees coming towards us. But my brain was the thing that I was most aware of. That I just felt like I couldn't quite put all the pieces together to make a coherent decision in those immediate moments after we were hit with hundreds or thousands of bullets. But quite quickly, once you sort of extract yourself from the immediacy of the attack, then again, just a split second more time, your brain starts to get used to it, and then therefore you can start to take things in around you. But yeah, it was an interesting experience and a very humbling experience to realize that not everybody performs brilliantly the first time they're in something really, really tough, and that was genuinely the sort of the most shocking thing that I'd been involved in my life to that point.
Going back to just what you said, I'm really interested that you said you felt you'd failed, that you hadn't performed as well as you felt you should have performed. I mean, it was an extreme situation, and you are a human being, and yes, you are trained in all those things, but it's the first time you'd ever experienced something like that. Do you feel that looking back on it, do you still use those words about yourself like failure and you weren't good enough, or have you moved on from that and sort of can see that there were things you could learn, but you did not fail? So,
Yeah, I mean, like I
yeah.
said, I felt I'd failed in the moment because, well, firstly, one
Yeah.
of my team members was killed, and therefore I didn't, as the commander, didn't bring the team home, and that was, will always be an issue that I regret. But I don't think when I've not rehearsed it, but looked back over the incident itself, with many years separating me from that time, that there was very much that we would have done differently based on the information we had at the time. We didn't know that the house was full of people ready to fight, waiting for us to come and knock on their door. The house looked like it was empty. There were chains on the gate. So when we cut the chain rather, to go into the compound, it looked like it was a derelict or an under construction building. There was nothing to give us an indication that anything bad was going to happen. We'd actually already achieved our mission about an hour before, helping to identify a bomb maker and we found a bomb in the back of his car. So it was kind of like, well, he's obviously the guy. And not that we let our guard down, but this was really a decision that I'd made to look down the rest of the street with the team and just try and sort of interview and question people to see if they knew anything about the bomb maker, the original guy. So I don't now sort of think of it as a gnawing failure. I mean, it's still something that is terribly sad because we lost
Yeah.
people.
Really.
But it
Yeah.
was a massive lesson to be learned by all of us, and that was part of why those teams and the military is very good at this, and many businesses as well, but many are not. But many businesses, the ones that I see do best, and when something bad or unforeseen does happen, rather than people blaming each other or trying to gloss over it, we sat down very quickly afterwards and went through what we would call a hot wash or a wash up, where we said, right, what went well, what didn't go well, what can we make sure that we do differently next time to avoid the same thing happening again and to be more successful. And I think that honesty and maturity in any size of team or business is absolutely critical, and it comes from the leadership. The leader must be willing to be challenged, questioned, criticized if something hasn't gone well, so that everybody collectively can get better. And it's not about, as I said, blame, even if you might feel in the moment you're being attacked by the debrief or the wash up when the details of what went on and the decisions that were made come out. But actually, it's a really important process, because resilience, as I've learned through writing the book and having sort of been forced to go back and look through my life and all the different experiences I've had, resilience only is built on the back of things that are hard. If you've never really struggled or been challenged, it's very hard to build up that resilience and the muscle memory, because you don't have anything that you've got through that was in the moment making you feel, can I even do this? Will I be successful?
Do you talk about sort of blame, and I think that's a really important issue in terms of a business environment. Too often in my role as a consultant, I've been in places and everyone's blaming everyone else. They're not taking responsibility, and as you say, it often starts at the top, because the leadership won't go, oh, I've made a mistake, and move on from it. Everybody's sort of trying to avoid taking responsibility. That's the real issue. So how would you suggest that people apply what you've learned to that sort of work environment and get rid of that sort of blame culture?
Again, you've hit the nail on the head with that last word. So it's all about the culture, and the culture is set by the leadership. And culture for me is far more than a nice poster in the canteen or a mouse mat, or it's got to be something that you live and breathe. The culture has to be
So
real.
true. They just list
And
it
this,
out and that's it.
yeah,
Look, here's a poster.
or
This
that
is
you
what we
get
want.
a card for your
Yeah.
wallet that has the things on there, and when someone questions you, you quickly pull it out to remind yourself what it
Yeah.
is. It's got to be much more visceral and personal. And for me, this is all about clarity of purpose. And you, as the leadership, have to set the direction in which the company is going, and what is some call it the North Star, Super North Star, or common purpose, as we called it in when we were doing consulting, when I was doing it with a methodology called Team of Teams. Having that clarity of purpose and the clear goal that everyone is pulling towards means that if you can then align your personal and your organizational values with that vision, then really sort of powerful stuff can happen. And if everyone understands the bigger picture, the bigger why, essentially, and there's lots been written on the importance of why, but it really, I've seen this, lived and breathed it for decades, that if you have a really clear why, the criticism or the honesty with which one unpicks an incident that's happened or a process that's failed or whatever, it doesn't feel quite as personal, because you know that collectively you're all pulling in the same direction. And I think the challenge I see with a lot of businesses is where they have lots of silos that are still either deliberately or have sort of put in place or have sort of grown over time, that you become quite territorial and tribal to your own team or your own tribe.
Yeah.
And the whole methodology with
True.
Team of Teams was that we were part of a bigger team. And it didn't matter whether your team was successful or not. If you had information or skills or capabilities that other teams to your left and your right needed for everybody to collectively win or get to that sort of goal, and you didn't share or you didn't offer that help, then you'd all failed. It didn't matter if you said, but my team's done brilliantly. It was not, it was completely irrelevant. And that really was set from that leadership right from the top. And being able to say you don't know as a leader is, again, something that people assume, well, I'm the boss, I shouldn't be admitting when I don't know something or if I've got
I
something
always
wrong.
do.
It can be, I mean, it's very easy for me because I get stuff wrong all the time. But some of the best leaders I've ever worked for would be the first to admit the things they didn't know or that they had got wrong. And the way that changed the culture and the openness with which people would then be willing to offer alternative views was super powerful. I'll just tell one quick vignette. It's not in the book, but it's sort of instructive in this bit of the conversation, that one quite senior military leader I had once one day a week in a really busy theatre in the Middle East. He would spend one day a week traveling to different bases or outposts around the kind of the area of responsibility that he had. And in a very unscripted way, he'd sit with junior soldiers, young soldiers in the dining hall canteen, and he would ask questions like, "If I told you that you can't go home until we win, what would you do differently, or what should I do differently as the commander?" And although their immediate bosses were freaking out and panicking that junior soldier so and so might say something embarrassing or awkward or insubordinate, the thoughtful feedback that he got from people who are far closer to some of the problems that they were being asked to deliver from the headquarters on high were really, really powerful. And he would immediately come back that night. And every day we had a big sort of global video call. And he would often start and say, right, this is the why. He'd remind everybody why we were there and why it was important. But he'd then give an example. I just met Private Rebecca, and she told me this, this, and this. And I hadn't thought of it like that. And I think we should give it a go. And so again,
Right.
across the entire enterprise, even really junior people who would be many years of experience, below the general or the admiral, and many ranks below, would be feeling that actually they could influence the outcome, and that was really powerful for making people feel valued.
Oh
And so
yeah,
that culture
absolutely.
is really,
Yeah.
really important. That you've got to be able to get answers from wherever the expertise lies, and it's not about age, it's not about experience, it's just looking at some of these challenges in the complex world in which we all live now with fresh eyes and different lenses, because we all come to every problem with our own biases and experiences
Oh,
on which we
absolutely.
rely that may not be relevant in that moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's excellent. I'm very impressed by him actually. So that person. It's so true. The people on the ground floor often can tell you exactly how to save your business or really
Yeah, I mean, how
improve
many
it.
times have you been told, here is the strategy from the executive committee, and you open it or you read it as a junior person in the business, you go, if only they'd asked me. I know what they're trying to achieve, but we could do it better if we did this, this, or this. But quite often it's sort of imposed on you
Yeah,
rather than actually having some sort of, not necessarily a consultative process, but having a feedback loop that allows everybody to contribute to the way in which the whole business or organization can be successful. And then that gives people skin in the game and they feel much more able to influence, as I said, and part of it.
absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things I found really interesting about your book was that you'd partnered with a world-class trauma researcher to actually, and at the end of each chapter, you've got these bits that sort of analyze the psychology of after your story. It talks about what sort of psychological impacts these things were having and how to think about things differently. And it's beautifully laid out. I really love the layout of this. But what did partnering with her actually help you bring to the book from your point of view, rather than just writing it on your own?
Yeah, great question. So, as I said at the start, really, I didn't want this to be a memoir. It had to be useful and valuable and helpful in some way. So, just having my life experiences as authentic and as extreme as some of them might be, it didn't feel like it was enough. So, through a mutual friend, a former police officer, I was introduced to Dr. Jess Miller, who's a neuropsychologist who's worked almost her entire career with emergency services trauma and policing trauma more specifically. And we met and we decided and discussed how we could take the sort of specific lessons really from each of the different themes, because the way that the book is laid out, there are 12 chapters and each chapter really covers a different theme of resilience, whether it's childhood trauma, relationship breakdowns, imposter syndrome, getting out of your comfort zone, the power of community, and all sorts of things that most people will go through at least one of them during their lives, and you'd be lucky or unlucky not to have experienced any kind of challenge. So at the end of each of those thematic chapters, Jess then takes the key neuropsychological learnings and explains what's going on in the brain. So whereas you might go through something traumatic and you think, I just want to move on, I just need to get over this, but it's taking longer than you expected or that you want. And that's really frustrating for people. I've been there, I'm sure you've been there, most people have. So she will say in very easy to understand language, the reason you can't just move on is because your brain has to go through these processes in this order, or it can't do both of these things at the same time, and sort of breaks it down to make it clearer why things take the time they do or things happen in a certain way. And then at the end of that sort of science and thinking section, we then give a very, very simple practical exercise that every one of us could do in some cases, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, or a couple of minutes a day, or every time one is a little bit overwhelmed by the thing you're facing in that moment. And so I think between us, we wanted there to be a balance between lived experience. I mean, Jess has got plenty of lived experience as well, clearly, but taking some of that lived experience and then translating it into very understandable, easy to read, and easy to implement strategies for helping people either build resilience or understand why resilience develops or doesn't develop in the ways that sort of it happens in the brain.
Oh, as I say, I found it really interesting, and I loved those end bits of the chapter. It really brings it together so nicely, and really helpful as well if there are things that do affect you. And one of
Yeah,
the things that actually I wasn't surprised about was when I saw that you'd had sort of very personal childhood trauma, which if people want to find out about, they can read the book. But you had a very, very difficult childhood. And then you went then on into the military, and I've seen that a lot with policemen, which I think you also mentioned in the book. But one of the things
yeah.
I've also found interesting is you talk about the sort of structural hierarchy and how those sorts of roles are attractive to people with childhood trauma. And I've seen an awful lot of that in my career with lawyers and accountants as well, because they have this desire to be very, really good at what they do, almost an overdrive, to be brilliant, to be perfect. And there's no room for error in the legal world or in accountancy. So I think there's a lot of people that end up in those worlds because of childhood traumas and wanting to excel and get over that trauma. So I think from their point of view, your book's really interesting. But why did you feel that the childhood trauma was so important to a leadership conversation and for those sorts of people?
Well, I mean, my childhood was difficult, but it wasn't as bad as many. And I want to say that sort of up front. I recognize that many have far more challenging and traumatic childhoods, but mine was pretty unpleasant for me.
I was going to say,
Um,
not sure about that.
um, but it was, and I'd never really, I mean, I accepted that it was what it was, but I'd never really thought about it in the context of everything else that followed until I started chatting to Jess and doing some of my own research to realize, as you said, that many people who have difficult childhoods that feature trauma do often go into the emergency services kind of space where you are wanting to help and support others or do things for the greater good. It seems to be quite a well understood trait, I suppose, of people that have been through something challenging. The reason I raised it is because when I was forced to sort of go back and remember some of the things that happened, as well as reading books like The Body Keeps the Score, and understanding that even though I felt that I'd absolutely moved on from that childhood trauma and some of the other things that had happened in my life early on, actually it's still cumulative. There are still things that are as a result of that cumulative exposure to difficult things or trauma. Now, I think I'm pretty resilient as a result, and that's part of the process of having gone through all those things. I've built up a fairly decent bank account of resilience, tolerance, as it were, or tolerance to trauma. But it does still have an impact, and I know, particularly from my school experience, where I was going to be thrown out of school and was lucky to be able to stay, that had I not gone through some of those things, I probably wouldn't have been as productive as I have been later in life, because there was always this fear that everything was going to be taken away deliberately by my father or through circumstance, that all the things you just took for granted, whether it's your friends or your schooling or your sports teams, would be gone in an instant. So although I didn't really consciously think about it until much later, actually the need to constantly, just not for anyone else particularly, I mean, I always wanted to do a good job in everything I was doing, whether it was at work or sports or whatever, but the need to be spinning multiple plates at the same time was more just to sort of prove to myself that I was still useful. Don't know if that sounds a weird thing to say, but
No, it sounds very understandable.
so I
Yeah.
love the idea of having a much simpler life where I just do one thing and I do that well, and I have my routine, but I just know that I'm not wired that way. I like to be challenged, I like to be stretched, and as much as it's uncomfortable to always feel like you're not, you're the least clever person in the room and the least qualified in some cases, actually I think I do my best work when I know that other people that I can see around me are brilliant at what they do, and I feed off the fact that I have to get better and have to be adding value or contributing. Otherwise, I don't feel I should be there.
There's so much I could say to that. I actually don't know where to start. But I mean, one of the things that you've talked about already was how your teams functioned, um, beforehand. You're saying about the why and then looking at how everyone could contribute to that team. Where do you think the key differences are between the teams that you've worked in with that sort of leadership and your average workplace team? And why don't more organizations copy that sort of format from your experience with businesses? So
Yeah, I mean, teams, the quality of people is obviously mixed, and every company will have selection criteria, interview criteria to select who they think are the best people for their teams, but you're always going to have different capabilities and capacities in the team. And I think understanding what is a high performing team, or what could be a high performing team versus others, is the first thing to recognize. And as a leader and as a teammate, whether you're a follower, a teammate, or a leader, is recognizing what each member of that team brings, and not hiring all the same type of people. You do need that different the different levels of capability and capacity, and people that just do different things brilliantly. But I think we kind of touched on it already. The teams that are most successful are those that are never happy with today's performance, the ones that are always trying to find something better that they could do tomorrow, a better way of streamlining a process, or being more effective, or cutting out waste, or whatever it may be, and having a culture that encourages that. And where you are trying to genuinely transform a business rather than just evolve it sort of slowly over time, if you're trying to do transformational things, transformation by definition is it's difficult. Things will be disrupted as a result of those changes you're making. If you're just tinkering around the edges of something because you want to just improve your bottom line by 2% or whatever, you're probably not going to be doing the things that are going to fundamentally change the business functions. And those businesses that are willing to make decisions quickly, to try things that they believe will make a difference, and even if they don't, that they don't then either cancel the entire process or blame people or fire people, because you'll just kill that culture of people trying to look for things to be better. And I think those businesses fundamentally, sort of a summary, I guess, to your question, is those that are willing to empower people at every level are the ones that I see make the most difference and achieve the greatest things most quickly. And it takes a lot of trust and courage to actually give people who may be quite junior or fairly new the responsibility to make decisions locally for something that either historically or institutionally would normally be held at their headquarters level or the head office level. That's the thing I find really exciting when I'm building teams, is giving people responsibility and saying, look, I'll give you the support you need. Just let me know when you think you need it, or I can mentor you. But I want to empower people so that I don't have to be there. The teams that rely on the boss to give direction are the ones that will be too slow when the opportunity presents itself. And therefore they will get a team that ends up just doing what it's told to do, rather than thinking genuinely and creatively about what might be the best way to do something, because the boss doesn't always have the answers, very rarely has all the answers, and shouldn't have all the answers. So empowerment, I think, is key, is having the ability to communicate, the ability to trust and have that clear vision and values, and then empower.
So just bringing your previous answer with that one, and in the book you talk about self-doubt, which I think lots of people have, and I'll come back to talking about that in a minute. But if you put all that together, do you think one of the most important things is actually an interpersonal skill about forgiveness? So if your staff make a mistake, you forgive them, but that comes back to being able to forgive yourself if you're not perfect. Do you think that all of us could do with working a little bit harder on forgiving ourselves when we're not 150%? Because most of us, I think, try and achieve this impossible level of perfection, and actually probably 90% is okay for most people, and it means we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, self-compassion is something we talk about a little bit in the book. And again, that was something that came really from my conversations with Jess. And once I really understood more of this, I realized I sort of remembered all the times where I had been harder on myself than probably was sensible or warranted. And therefore, it's something that we can all do better, I think, as leaders. I certainly can, in having more patience and more tolerance when things don't go wrong. But I think for me as a leader, it may not be that I forgive somebody for doing something stupid, but I think and I may still have to take them aside and say, what the hell were you doing? What were you thinking? That was a stupid thing to do. You didn't, exercise judgment. But I would still publicly take responsibility for it. If they were part of my team, I think it's really important that invariably it's probably something that you didn't do as the boss that caused that decision to be made. If they'd had a little bit more information or the right document that would have enabled better judgment to have been shown, unless it was something really stupid. But quite often it was my fault when something didn't go as I'd expected. So I would always very publicly take responsibility and the blame, if there was blame to be had, by the senior level. So it's on me. That in itself, for the team below you, would realize they would realize that actually you've got their back, and that's as important as anything else, I think. Because there was one incident, I won't go through the whole thing, but essentially somebody sent out a report to a multinational group of leaders in Brussels, our weekly report from something, and he'd come to me when I sort of rewound the week before. He'd come to me multiple times during the week to ask if I wanted to check his draft, and in my desire to say, look, I trust you, you know the detail, you're great, he kept on going away looking really sheepish. And then when he came in one final time to say, do you want to just have a final look before I upload it to the website? And I said, no, you crack on. And then he did it. I got the notification. I couldn't believe what he'd written, and I wanted to scream, but I realized he'd been asking multiple times for help. And for all the right reasons, I'd said, no, I trust you, but I shouldn't have trusted him because he didn't have the knowledge, and that was my fault. I assumed he had knowledge that wasn't there. So that was a good lesson for me that I'm reminded of a lot.
That's a great example as well. But talk to me about self-doubt, because listening to your story, I think a lot of people would think, what, here? That's ridiculous, that you have self-doubt. So tell me about how that sort of comes when you struggle with it, what you do with it when it happens.
I think this comes down to self-awareness, doesn't it? I mean, maybe I go too far the other way, that I'm very conscious always of the brilliance of other people. I love working with brilliant people, whether even in a sporting team. I'm always the smallest, I'm always the slowest. I've always wanted to be better. And so there's always that niggling, or should I be here? I'm not good enough to be here. But at the same time, I've got this sort of fire in me that says, I'm going to be here. No one else is going to tell me I can't be here. But there's a sort of the two sides of the same coin. One side saying, just go. You shouldn't be here. This is not your place. And the other side saying, sod you all. I'm staying until somebody kicks me out. So I think self-doubt / humility / self-awareness is absolutely critical. Not to the point of paralysis.
Yes.
And that's the bit that's really key, is that if you're paralyzed by that self-doubt and the fact that you really shouldn't be there, then it's not helpful at all. But I think having a healthy dose of nervousness or desire to not let other people down is helpful to a point. And the example I give in the book, I won't again spoil the whole plot, but I was selected for a very high level, world championship level thing for sports. And the letter that selected me for that team got lost in the post. And I only had a month to train for a world championships, my first world championships in this new particular sport. I've been lucky to represent.
What was this sport?
Duathlon. So I'd been lucky enough to represent England and Great Britain in a few other sports already, rugby and rowing and stuff. But this is my first world championships in a new sport. And I had a month to train because I didn't get the letter. I assumed I hadn't been selected. So I just stopped training because I was doing other things. I was learning to fly helicopters.
You're down the pub, weren't you?
Pretty much. And so suddenly there was a panic of I had a month to try and get world championship fit, which was ridiculous. But long story short, when I turned up on the start line, having not had breakfast, I was a bit hungover for another reason you'll read about, and not having had much sleep. I was so relaxed because there was no pressure.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even be here. I haven't had the training. I haven't eaten. I'm a bit hungover. I'm just going to try and enjoy it. And it was painful, but I gave myself a kind of a pass, as it were, that I didn't put the pressure on. Now, I'm not saying don't train. I mean, I did a half marathon yesterday for charity, and I wish I'd trained for that as well. And I've got a hernia at the moment, so that was slightly annoying, and it was very uncomfortable to run. But I knew that I should have done more, but I couldn't. There was no way I could have in that instance. So I gave myself a bit of a get out, and I had the race of my life. I mean, I didn't win the world championships or anything, but I came 20th in my age group in the world, and I was thrilled because I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So self-compassion and giving yourself a little bit more credit, or not being too hard on yourself sometimes is helpful. But I think also, as I said, unless it paralyzes your ability to act, having the humility and the self-awareness to know if you don't have all the answers and that you need to really step up to be to perform well, then that's also quite helpful.
So every chapter has practical exercises. If you were going to give one to a leader this week, so just try this, see how you get on. What would you suggest to them? Which one would you give them?
Well, they're all good in their own way, and there's 12 of them. There's one that probably the simplest one that, there's no excuse for not being able to do this any time of the day, wherever you happen to be, is called finding your feet. And it's when you start to identify either the signs that you're about to be overwhelmed or you're not quite sure what to do, is literally just pausing and consciously feeling your feet attached to the ground that you're standing on in that moment. And then thinking, okay, I'm on this tiny patch of ground, but then I'm in London, or I'm in the UK, or and you start to sort of look out and sort of adjust your mind's view to where you are. And it sort of grounds you again in that moment, and just it gives you a small time to breathe and pause. And it may take 5 seconds, it may take 2 seconds, it could take 10 seconds, doesn't matter. But just consciously finding your feet, and it's a bit like not control out delete necessarily, but just refreshing your screen before you then go to the next thing. And any one of us can do that. And there's a bit more detail to it, but essentially some of these things are so simple that you don't have to be really dedicating minutes or hours of your day to do this. All of these things, again, it comes a little bit down to identifying those things in your life that are your triggers, and the things that might cause you to slightly panic or become overwhelmed, and therefore being aware of them, and trying to put in place little techniques that can either preempt that feeling before you get to the point of, oh my God, what do I do now? Just to calm yourself so you can just keep going.
And would that work for somebody who was feeling very overwhelmed already and under pressure, and they're not coping? Would that exercise help them, or are there other exercises as well that you
There are other exercises as well,
recommend?
but I think a lot of things, when I speak to many people around the world from all different backgrounds, some might be veterans, some might be single parents, some might be parents with disabled children, or I've even had quite a few young adults who are worried about whether they're going to be good enough for the job that they have applied for, or they've just been selected for, and will they succeed or fail or whatever. I think for me personally, something that I've got much better at since COVID, because we had that obviously a hideous experience for most people, and I'm sure many listening will have had friends or family members who either really badly suffered or even potentially died. But being forced to be or not necessarily be present, but in one place for more than 10 seconds for me was a good thing. And I became much more aware of my body's rhythm, and the amount of sleep I was having, and the amount of water I was drinking. Just my life generally is so busy and all over the place. I travel so much around the world. I mean, I really would burst into flames if I ever met Greta Thunberg, which probably wouldn't be a good thing with my carbon footprint. But being forced to be still or in one place for more than 5 seconds was actually really good for me. And that's something I've tried to carry on since the end of COVID, is be really conscious of my sleep, not getting sucked into just carrying on scrolling through Instagram or Twitter or whatever late into the night, and then going to bed an hour later than you'd planned because you just got sort of into that rabbit hole or the social media spiral. Being really quite disciplined with yourself to say, I know that I need to sleep, therefore I've got to try and be sensible with those things. And the number of people that seem overwhelmed just because they're really, really tired is so high. And I know a lot of people may have trouble sleeping, but just being really conscious of the things that might help, that don't require money or sort of interventions necessarily. Just do the basic things and try them, because that might be the one thing that makes a huge difference to you. Just being, in the morning, most things do feel better in the morning, or going out for a walk, or just standing outside, or even standing on your balcony and just looking at the trees, or just for a moment getting some sun on your face. Some of these things are really, really simple. Whether you're in a wheelchair or able to walk or run or whatever, take the dog out. It's the simplest things actually that can make the most difference. It doesn't require a big intervention. And that's something that I try and help people think about, because a lot of these habits, and it's all about getting into a habit, isn't it, for everything that we do daily, are easy to do, but it just requires you to think about them to get into that habit.
No, I think that's great advice. And all your profits are going to the Gurkha Welfare Trust, aren't they? And the Royal British Legion. Is that right?
No, Royal British Veterans Enterprise.
Oh,
So
right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so again, back to my point about not wanting this to be a memoir and wanting it to be helpful, I wasn't willing to write or promote a book if I was going to be taking the money. It was all about trying to see the number of ways in which I might be able to help people. So the two, not dedicated charities, but the two main charities is, as you said, the Gurkha Welfare Trust, because I was a Gurkha back in the day, and the Royal British Veterans Enterprise, a brilliant charity that's been around, actually one of the longest charities in the UK, set up just after the First World War. And they get all of my profits, but I also do events for other charities as well. So when I do a speaking event or sell books, then all the profits, every penny of profit that I make goes directly to the charities, because I want people to both feel inspired and motivated and helped by reading the book, but indirectly, when everybody that buys a book, every single book will see quite a decent amount of money go to those charities. So we're kind of helping in two ways.
Yeah, so I bought my 2 copies, didn't I? So I've done
Thank
my
you very
little
much.
bit.
Thank you very much. And hopefully
Well,
all
I
of your
know, I think
listeners
what
will
you've
buy
done is
multiple copies
amazing.
as well.
Yes, they're all going to
Yeah.
go out immediately. So in case you haven't seen it, I don't even know if I got it. No, I think it's not going to work on my screen. But we'll put we'll put a picture of it and a link to Amazon as well with the podcast, so everyone can buy it. But honestly, it's such a great read. Everybody should read it.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
I really enjoyed reading it. It's really
Well, it's been
good.
really humbling. The
So
feedback we've had, both public, the reviews online and stuff, have been great, but also just the number of people that have reached out who I don't know, just point to point reached out on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and many of the messages start with thank you for the book, blah blah blah, and I've never told anybody this, but, and then they share something really personal that, having read the book and seen how kind of vulnerable or open that I've been about some of my challenges or struggles, that has given them permission to be able to either think, talk, or say out loud the thing that they hadn't told anybody. I mean, some have said, I haven't told my husband or wife this, and then shared something about a childhood experience or whatever. So that's been really, I mean, it doesn't feel like pressure. A lot of people ask me, does that feel like a lot of pressure? But it not pressure, but really humbling that people feel that they can trust me with their most sensitive stuff, and the fact that the book has helped them think about or reframe the way that they have either processed or not yet processed, but now can, with the techniques that Jess and I have given them, to be able to think differently about how they can ensure that they continue to be resilient as they go through the next phase of their lives. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, and taking that into their business life as well, because your work life is such a huge and important.
Well, it's all linked, isn't it? At the end of the day,
Yeah,
I mean, how many, if you're going through a relationship breakdown, you might be the CEO or the head of a department, and you go to work and you've got to have your work face on, but clearly that stuff is still going to be in the back of your mind or even the front of your mind. So recognizing that every individual within an organization or a business has a whole bunch of different facets that make them who they are in that moment. And I think being a bit more mindful of that for everybody, and to your point about being a bit kinder, or giving people a bit more, I can't remember the phrase you used, but latitude. I know you didn't say latitude, but being kinder essentially, and recognizing that everybody is on a journey and other people are being affected by different things in their lives, and just having a bit more tolerance for that, and trying to help them understand how they can turn up to work and be more effective without worrying about those other things, or vice versa.
Yeah. Ash, it's been fantastic to see you, and thank you so much for doing this interview. And
no, thank you.
We will tell everybody where to get your book, and I really hope it does well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.